STEM Global Competitiveness Conference presents High Tech Sunday. On today's episode of High Tech Sunday, our hosts, Dr. Mark Vaughn and Lango Deen, sit down with founder and CEO of Crown Therapy, Dr. Tiffany Anderson. Up first is Corning Incorporated's Manager of Technical Talent Pipelining, Dr. Mark Vaughn. Next is Career Communication Group's Senior Technology Editor, Lango Deen. Finally, our esteemed guest, Dr. Tiffany Anderson. Dr. Anderson is a proud Black psychotherapist based in Baltimore, Maryland, who specializes in individuals, couples, and family therapy. Dr. Anderson created Crown Therapy to cultivate a light-filled community that supports mental health and spiritual growth. Her practice dismantles generational traumas, fosters spiritual awareness, empowers one's self-identity, interrupts pathological patterns, ignites intimate connections in family relationships. Without further delay, High Tech Sunday, featuring Dr. Mark Vaughn and Lango Deen.
Well, thanks so much for that introduction, Brandon. It's such a great pleasure to have the opportunity to join today's conversation with Dr. Tiffany Anderson. How are you, Dr. Anderson?
I'm doing well. Thank you all, just for having me. And although it's kind of early morning, I feel like I've had a busy morning already. So this kind of gives me an opportunity to kind of sit back, relax, and just kind of be present with you all today. So thank you again for having me.
Awesome. Well, I've got to tell you that I've had the great pleasure of working with this team on these podcasts for High Tech Sunday since June, and there's been such a myriad of outstanding topics that we've had the opportunity to discuss with esteemed individuals, colleagues, and leaders from all walks, all sectors of life, especially as they touch on science, technology, engineering, and math, and high tech. And I've got to tell you that the topic of today's conversation absolutely, in my opinion, undergirds the opportunity for us to do high tech and anything else consistently and intentionally, and that is mental health. We've been hit with a 1, 2, 3, 4 punch or more for the entirety of this decade, pretty much. When you think about the pandemic that has gripped the world, the economic challenges, the racial unrest, the issues with politics, all of that has certainly become a mental health concern. And so it's giving rise to another crisis. So this is such a timely and important conversation. And I want to dig into all of that. But before we do, we want to get to know you a little bit better. So I'm going to start with a fun, but maybe a little bit of a tough question. Can you kind of tell us, who is Dr. Tiffany Anderson, and how did you get your start in this really interesting field?
That is, you're right, it is a big question. Who is Dr. Anderson? Well, I'm going to first take off doctor, and it's really just who is Tiffany, because I find that certain labels begin to define who we are, and feeling as if we have to kind of live up to this certain label, right? So when you put doctor in front of it, it kind of takes away my experience prior to becoming a doctor. And again, that's not what you're doing, right? But that's when you put that doctor in front, I notice that things begin to shift as if I feel as if I have to take on a new identity, if you will. So to really kind of identify who Tiffany is, it really starts with coming from, a family, a large family. There is 6 of us, 6 kids. I am the 4th child of the 6 children. And, I grew up in this kind of communal and loving home. With that, there were dysfunction. There was, love. There was laughter. There was growth. But if I can begin to kind of summarize, who I am a person that loves people. I'm an individual that genuinely cares for the outcome of individuals' lives. I'm that person that wants to help any way I can. And so what I find is that in almost any environment, I'm the person that, even at parties, is in the corner talking to an individual, kind of helping them with their lives in one way or the other, right? But I grew up seeing that from my grandmother, from my mother, from my father, from my siblings, seeing what it looked like to just truly love individuals and helping each other. And so I just come from a place of community. I come from a place of love. And that has just kind of shaped my trajectory in going into mental health. And wanting to really just help individuals overall and wanting to see their growth. And so, that kind of begins to shape who I am. And I know we'll dig a bit deeper, but just to kind of summarize it, I am just a person that loves to see the growth in others.
Thanks so much for setting that context. And when you were speaking about your family experience and this whole idea of community, certainly the importance of that rings so true for us today. And so you began to say that out of that interest in helping people came this passion that has informed your trajectory. What would you say your passion really is as a psychotherapist? What is it that drives you? Because it certainly would appear that it's not definitely a cakewalk to do what you do.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's not a cakewalk. My trajectory to get to this place was not a cakewalk either. But that passion that you asked is really wanting to help individuals, specifically Black individuals, kind of experience this spiritual, psychological, emotional, and kind of physical freedom, right? And so my place in that is really helping the folks that come to see me really kind of dig in deep and explore who they are, what they want to become, how they want to live their life in their true authenticity and their true freedom, right? Because as individuals, we all have our own issues, right? We all have our own traumas. We're all fighting a silent battle. And so when folks come to me for therapy, we put those battles on the forefront, right? We speak truth to that. We make meaning of it. And then we say, okay, what do we want to do moving forward? How can we make this work for us? Because although I'm a therapist, I too have those traumas, right? I too have experienced those struggles. And so I have had to do the same processing that my clients are doing today. And so that's how I help, right? That's a part of the passion and a part of the connection is that they're not alone and that I am doing the work that they're doing either currently or have done it. And that we're working together to get through it. So that's the passion when I see folks walk in and I'm like, oh, so what can I help? Like, how can I help? What can I help you, work on? How can I inspire you? How can I encourage you? Because it really goes back to me wanting to be the person that I didn't have growing up. And that, and that was that person. And it's not that I didn't have, encouraging individuals because I did, but not in the therapy context, right? Not sitting across and it just being about you. Like I said, I come from a family of 6. It's not just about me, right? And so when you come to therapy, you get your time to just be you, right? To just focus on the areas that you want to grow in, and just explore who you are and like tap into that internal awareness and that internal growth. And so that's where the honestly, that's just where my passion, like even when I'm speaking about it, right? I'm passionate. Like this is what excites me about the work I do, because I am in the process, or in the midst of seeing individuals have epiphanies and make connections about their lives. I also see them in times that aren't so good, and it comes with the work. But you know, there has always been a time where even where there's darkness, that we find some sort of light in the midst of a session, in the midst of a conversation. And so that's the drive. That is a passion for me.
So the headline that I took away from that statement were those 4 incredibly important words: you are not alone. And I'm sure that that's got to be incredibly grounding and comforting as people begin their work with you. And then you talked about making connection. I want to jump into kind of, I guess, a mental health 101 for a few minutes, but I do want to ask one more "who is Tiffany" question really quickly. You touched on spirituality a few times. Can you speak to us about how spirituality has played a role in your life to this point and even now?
Absolutely. Where do I begin? So spirituality has played a major factor in my life. I come from a family that is very spiritually inclined and connected. So I was born with that gift in the sense of feeling energies around me, right? And being able to connect with individuals effortlessly, tapping into my own sense of spirituality, like basically, what are you feeling, right? Again, that is a sense of spirituality when you are that self-aware that you know when something is off. What are you feeling? What do you need? And who do you need to talk to? And how, and what do you need from the divine in this moment? Right. And so that is what really kind of helps with like the prayer life. But spirituality, to be honest with you, was something that I've always had. And it's always been a deep connection to the divine in everyone and everything around me. And so how it has helped and guided me is really being able to tap in with the divine and with myself during difficult moments, lifting myself, out of despair, and sadness, knowing when to ask for help, knowing when to bring in my father who has the best, words of advice, and knowing when to bring in my mother who knows how to get you back on your feet and get you moving, right? And so I always knew who to tap in to according to what I needed. And then when it was outside of them is when I would tap into the divine and through prayer and say, okay, what do I need? How can I get through this? How can I honestly just kind of strengthen myself enough to do it even when I'm scared, which I do every day. And so my spirituality overall has just played a role in, allowing me to tap into my internal strength in places of darkness, and when I need to lift myself up and continue the journey.
Very cool and very relatable. Thank you so much for sharing that testimony about how it is that evolution has continued to inform even your passions today. So let's just jump into what we are here really to explore with you, and that is the importance of mental health. we all can relate in some way to the fact that in general, but especially in communities of color, this is a topic that folks tend to find difficult to embrace and actually benefit from. So let's just start with the basics. Why is it important to pay attention to this idea of mental health, especially in these trying times that we are living in, these unprecedented historical times? Why is this such an important topic?
Yeah, it's so important because mental health really drives the way we think, we feel, and we act in the face of life's situations, right? So our mental health affects how we handle stress, how we relate to one another and make decisions. Um, it influences the way we look at ourselves, um, and just our overall kind of life circumstances. And so there's really no way to get away from one's mental health, right? And so with that, we have to, really take it seriously, because it is something that if it is not managed well, it can really shift our lives. It can cause distortions in our thinking. It can really interrupt intimate and platonic relationships. We use our mental health every day to make decisions. If that is distorted in any way, if our lens is rooted in our wounds, it can really shift the way we make decisions. It can shift the way we feel and connect with others emotionally. And so that is why, mental health is so important. And it is something that I think should be talked about more, because it is the roadmap of our lives, to be honest.
So when you think about, you just said something very important. You said this needs to be talked about more. So let's just really try to hone in on the realities. There's a stigma, if you will, that people often have with the idea of counseling. And this, like I said, can be especially true of people in communities of color. So, what gives rise to this stigma, and what do you think are some possible solutions to begin to break down those walls?
Um, well, the stigma, there's a, quite a few. The one we see the most often in the Black community is surrounded around, mental health and the health, field as a whole not being safe for Black and Brown individuals. Historically, it has not always been safe. And so that stigma is rooted in truth, and we recognize that. So I do want to normalize that there is a reason for that stigma. However, with that stigma, it obviously has prevented folks from seeking the help that they need. And so the concern is, how do we get individuals, specifically those in subjugated communities, to really get the support that they need? And so what I have found in my experience is that individuals are looking for therapists and mental health professionals that look like them, that share similar cultural and lived experiences. And so with that, we are seeing a rise in Black and Brown individuals coming to therapy, but requesting that their therapist is of color, right? And so many of my phone calls are, they either, see me on the website, and they may confirm, are you African American? You look it, but I'm not sure, right? They may confirm, and then I let them know. Of course, yes, I am. How can I help you, right? So some of their questions, and we go back to what you're saying in regards to, some benefits. Some of those questions could be, and has been for me, how do you feel about racial injustice? or what is your stance, or how have you helped other African American individuals if they're dealing with racial injustice? And so those are great questions to ask therapists to know their stance, right? And so going back to the stigma, it is there, and it is present. However, there is a rise of individuals of color seeking out therapy, particularly those that look like them. So how do we begin to kind of break that down? Is to have more therapists of color, right? Absolutely, to have more therapists that have a range of experiences outside of the dominant culture. And so that is one of those things, one of those barriers to begin to break it down is to encourage more folks outside of the dominant culture to look into mental health practices and, studies and education.
That's such a critically important connection that you just drew, and thank you for the approach. You said that I acknowledge that the stigma is actually born legitimately, but we can work to tear down those barriers. And it's really encouraging to hear you say that the numbers of Black and Brown people is increasing in terms of those who are seeking mental health services and support. So let's stay on that line just a little bit. When you talk about being connected, I read the title of your dissertation with great interest. When you think about the lived experience of African American women concerning the intersection of God image and racial inequality, that is so powerful. So you had to have drawn from that experience some key learnings for yourself. Can you tell us what the experience of writing and researching that dissertation was, and what were some of the key learnings from that project for you?
Yes. Thank you for your interest. This was a project that is still dear to my heart and an experience that I will never, ever forget, for sure. So where do I begin? So I'll start with the wonderful participants. I interviewed 7 African American women and spoke to them about their religious and spiritual experiences, along with experiences of racial inequality, right? And I wanted to understand the intersection of religious and spiritual experiences and racial inequality. And I know it sounds and feels as if it is 2 separate things. And so I wanted to know, for Black women, is it separate, right? Is it separate? Because what we know in the research is that African American women are the most religious individuals, period. They are the most, in the United States, the most religious, right? That means they attend the highest number of, religious services. They report the highest number of, prayers a day and certain things, right? So I wanted to know from Black women that have the highest level of spirituality, and while experiencing racial inequality, how are we connecting those two? And so I want to know that while I'm doing this work, I am also being triggered in every way possible because I am a Black woman who is spiritual and experiences racial inequality, right? So this project was healing in so many ways by gathering their experiences about how they emotionally connected to the divine. Some spoke about, through prayer, through nature, through family and friends, through connections. And then they spoke about their experiences with racial, injustice. And, of course, those varied from academic settings, from just simply going to the store, walking down the street. They shared, specific stories and narratives around it. And then we talked about, is there a connection between the two? And what we found for these particular participants, that it was that they utilized their spirituality and religion as a way to cope with racial injustice, and it was their way of kind of emboldening themselves to push through it. And it wasn't simply based on resilience, which we see in a lot of the research that African Americans are very resilient, and we are. But this was more of an intentional act that I would not allow racial inequality to break me down, and that I would utilize the love that I have for myself and the love that I feel from the divine to continue to push me forward. And so that in itself, again, was healing for me, because we're living very similar lives. And so I was able to put this in a very, detailed dissertation, and get that information out to the world. And it is a project that I am very proud of.
Sounds like you have great reason to be. Congratulations on that. So before I turn it over to my co-host Lango Deen, who's going to drill down a little bit more, I think, on some of what you touched on regarding the pipeline of therapists of color. You mentioned that there has been an increase in the numbers of people who are seeking support. We have been, for a good portion of this year, in lockdown, working from home, stay-at-home orders. So how has all of that impacted your industry? How do you connect with folks and really make those partnerships when in many cases it's in 2D now and not face-to-face?
Yeah, good question. So telehealth is now our new normal, right? Zoom is now our new normal. And so in regards to therapy, we have transitioned from in-person to telehealth, which is a video chat, if you will, where, you're connecting over the internet and administering therapy. What I have found for me personally has been a positive experience. It hasn't felt as if it's been too much of a transition, but I do recognize that the clients I have been working with are clients that I've had for a year or so, right? So many of them already have a connection or rapport with me. So doing it online wasn't a huge transition. So I was more concerned about those that were new. And so since the pandemic happened, I actually took on about 5 or 6 additional clients that have never met me in person. And that is very new for me. And I was a bit nervous, but we are resilient people. And, it is, just the times we're in. So I haven't had any personal issues with connecting. And when I mean connecting, I mean like emotionally connecting with my clients online. There may be some technical connections sometimes, right? But emotionally connecting via telehealth has not been an issue. But it's different knowing that I haven't met some of my clients in person, but it doesn't feel as if I haven't met them in person. So we're just transitioning with the times and, just kind of making it work.
I'm glad to hear that, because I would imagine that in addition to how you've gone about the transition, it opens up potentially the opportunity for you to connect with people beyond the regional constraints that you might otherwise find when people have to travel in to actually come to the office. So that's a huge opportunity right there. I have lots of other practical questions about, okay, how do I pick a therapist and related questions. But I'm going to hand things off to my co-host Lango Deen to talk about career and pipeline. And then I'll be back to get some tips about, okay, how do we in practice actually benefit from making the connection with a therapist? Hey, Lango, how are you?
You're listening to High Tech Sunday, featuring Dr. Mark Vaughn, Lango Deen, and our special guest, founder and CEO of Crown Therapy, Dr. Tiffany Anderson. This week's episode is brought to you by the BEYA STEM Global Competitiveness Conference. Now, back to the show.
I'm good, Dr. Vaughn. How about you?
I'm great. It's good to hear your voice.
Good to hear from you too. It's been a while. Well, welcome to the show, Dr. Anderson. Interesting conversation between you and Dr. Vaughn, and really enjoyed you talking about how you got to where you are, and talking about the dissertation that you did, that project. And as I did my little background research, I found out that 2 years ago, the APA did a study. Of course, this is the scientific and professional organization that represents psychologists in the United States. And they did a workforce study that looked really at how diverse the psychology workforce is. And what they found was that 86% of psychologists in the United States were white, 5% were Asian, another 5% were Hispanic, 4% were Black, and 1% were multiracial or from other ethnic groups. Now, these numbers show that this is less diverse than the US population as a whole, which is 62% white and 38% racial or ethnic minority. And the health service psychology workforce is 88% white and 12% racial and ethnic minorities. And that includes the academic workforce, which is 81% white and 19% racial ethnic minorities. So against that background, I wonder, as a Black woman in the field, there's so few professionals who look like you. What has your experience been? And what challenges have you had to face, and how can it be overcome?
Thank you, Lango, for that question. Just to give you some background, during my PhD program, although there were a few Black women and very few Black men in my program, I did have the privilege of working with 3 other Black women throughout my entire PhD program. So that assisted tremendously with, feeling connected to the work that I was doing, feeling connected to the program. And so it definitely helped get me through, right? These women have now also completed the program, and they are considered my sisters today. And so I would be remiss if I didn't speak to that and to that experience, because we leaned on each other so much because we weren't always represented, right? In our classes, in our textbooks, in the administration, right? We were not represented. So we leaned on each other tremendously. And every day we would check in and text each other and motivate each other. And when one was like, I don't want to do this, I am over it, the other one would say, me too, but we got to keep going. We're in this together. And so that was a large part of my experience that helped me get through that particular program, which is a similar experience with my master's program. However, you are absolutely correct with there being very little representation of people of color. And my experience of that is feeling silenced, feeling overlooked, feeling as if, certain administrators didn't have enough time to learn my name, right? Or getting, again, the 3 other Black women that I'm speaking about confused, calling us different names, not having enough administrators that looked like us or studied or, did studies that were similar to our interests, right? So having to find and pick through, okay, so who is the most open, right, to what I'm interested in? It's not that it's their interest or their work or of any kind, but who is the most open to me studying Black women? Yeah. So these are the type of experience that I had to go through and kind of navigate and maneuver through. Instead of just kind of feeling at home and kind of finding my place, I felt a bit unstable all the time. And those Black women were my anchors. They were my anchors the entire time. Part of that experience is having professors, stand in front of you and tell you about the Black experience that they'd never experienced. And, not being open to feedback that there's not enough books in the world that can teach you how it feels to be an African American in this society. Right. So trying to have those conversations, but oftentimes recognizing that you feel as if you can't. And that, there's a power dynamic going on because this is your professor and they are in charge of your grades, right? They're in charge of feedback that you receive in the course. So these are things that we really have to think about in regards to the academic setting, because this is trauma. This is considered trauma when you are having an internal dialogue with yourself that has you kind of really questioning your own identity, your own sense of self, and you can't speak to the person causing it. That's a part of trauma. And so that is a part of my experience, a part of others' experiences in the academic setting. And so as a professor now, I am now in the position to speak to students about whatever they need to speak about, right? And that I'm in the position to allow them to tell me if I have harmed them in any way, to come to me and talk about that, right? I'm also now in the position to extend grace if they need it, especially in a pandemic. If there's an extension, I commend them for reaching out and asking for help because I know I didn't always do that, right? So again, going back to what I said earlier, I'm just trying to be the person that I always wanted to have.
That's wonderful. What I hear from all of that is that here you are, you're transmitting a different set of norms, different values and beliefs in your classroom within this discipline and creating a whole new, different kind of social environment. So, I'm really encouraged by that. And so my question is, for young people who are interested in this field, I wish they could all have Professor Anderson now. What words of encouragement do you have for them?
Another great question. My encouragement to them would be to continue to do what feels right for them, right? What we hear is pick up a career that you can do for free, right? Follow your passions and your talents. And one thing about, mental health is this is a difficult field like many other fields. So this is something that has to be true to you. You can't fake this. You can't force this, right? Because you're connecting with real people in real time. And they feel when it's genuine, they feel when it's true. And so if this is something that you want to do, something that you feel that you can really begin to kind of help others transform, then go for it, but recognize your intention behind it. Why do you want to do this work? What do you want to get out of it? And also recognizing that it's not only, difficult to help others, but it's going to force you to help yourself. And it's going to force you to do some hard work internally. So make sure that you're prepared and ready to do the hard work within yourself first, so you can be in a position to help others do the hard work within themselves.
That's wonderful. My last question before I turn it back to Dr. Vaughn, and if you could take us through the steps really quickly. So here I am in high school. I'll just give you an example. I was talking to a younger mentee of mine recently, and he's been through a lot of root shock. What I mean by that is comes from a war environment and has experienced a whole set of displacements within the urban environment he finds himself in as an immigrant. And but it all goes back to that displacement, that fundamental displacement from the war. But he still wants to be a psychologist. So imagine talking to that high school person. What is the educational path to becoming a therapist like you? Does he have to get a PhD? What are the benefits of having a PhD versus not?
So with his trajectory, he would obviously graduate high school, and then he would obtain a bachelor's, right? It could be in psychology, it could be in speech communications, it could be in other things, but you want to have some type of foundation, right? And so for me, I received a BA in psychology. So that allowed me to, again, it's just the framework. It's just kind of understanding the framework. The thing about therapy that I didn't know is that you need at least a master's to begin practicing. So it's not enough to get a BA if you want to practice. But I know folks that have gotten psychology degrees and do other things and go on to be great, right? And so they don't necessarily stick with psychology. But with this individual who, wants to become a psychologist, definitely go to college, get a BA. Again, if you want that foundation around psychology, would be a start. And then your master's. Or you can go straight into kind of a PsyD program. For me, again, I did every track there was. BA, then got a master's. My master's is in marriage and family therapy. And so for him, he could, get his master's in an area, in a specific area in psychology if he wants a specific niche. Or he could simply get a PsyD. There are quite a few programs. I know Loyola University is one where you can come from straight from your bachelor's degree to get a PsyD, which is the psychologist track. For me, as a therapist, I did the PhD. I'm going to be honest with you all. I did not know I was going to do that. I did not plan to get a PhD. My plan was to get that master's, remember, because you need the master's to practice. So in my mind, I just need a master's to practice. I'll be fine. And once I got the master's, then you need a licensure. And so that consists of taking a test, and that consists of having hours, like certain hours that you record after seeing a certain number of individuals or families or whomever, right? So that's the trajectory where he couldn't stop because he wants to be a psychologist. So he does need a PsyD. So moving forward, he would need that last degree. PsyD is the psychologist. So you were doing a lot of the assessments with individuals and doing some talk therapy, but it's more based on assessments. For me, with a PhD, that really kind of centers you around teaching. So becoming like a 10-year professor of some sort, you can do consultant work, you can do research, you can do private practice, so my motivation with getting the PhD was that there's more of a variety of things you can do, and you can tap in kind of those various opportunities. But I'm going to be honest with you all, the biggest motivation for getting a PhD was I needed a reason for folks to listen and read the work that I was doing on the Black community. And I'm gonna be honest with you all, because it's not enough for us to say it. It's not enough for us to cry and tell the world what's going on. Sometimes it needs to be placed in research and in articles and in dissertations. And so this was my way of giving back to my community that could last a lifetime. And so that was my drive for the PhD.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Anderson. I can't wait to read your book. It's like one of my Bibles. You know, I have the Bible, but one of my Bibles, my academic Bible, is the one by Dr. Mindy Fullilove. You know her, Root Shock, right? I just love her work. So I'm looking forward to reading your work as well. I could go on, but at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Vaughn. And thank you so much. It's been a fascinating discussion with you. Dr. Vaughn?
Thanks a lot, Lango. And for the remainder of our time, I want to kind of subject you, Dr. Anderson, to some rapid fire questions. And then I want to end maybe with a little fun. So here's my rapid fire. You've walked us through the process of the importance of mental health, why to pay attention to it, how people who are interested in the field might be able to actually get started on that journey. So now, can you tell us the why, the when, and the what? Why should I seek out a therapist? When do I know it's probably a good time for me to actually be thinking about doing so? And what tips can you give me for how to select the right one for me?
Perfect. Okay. Why? Why should I seek out a therapist? If you want a place and an environment where you can be your authentic self, where you can really kind of dive into areas of your life that you just want to begin to process and to understand, or you just want to work on your, everyday trials and tribulations, is why you should seek out therapy. You don't necessarily have to be having a crisis to seek out therapy. You could seek out therapy anytime for any reason. So the why is really, why not? We all need a time and a place to talk to someone, and a time that is dedicated to just you and about you, that you don't have to share. So why not? Why not therapy? When? When do I know? Something that I had to learn personally as an individual that is in therapy as well is that you don't have to be at your lowest to seek out therapy. You don't have to be in crises to seek out therapy. So the when is simply when in need of support, in need of some advice, some love, some encouragement. So your when is just simply when you need support.
And then how about any tips for how I pick the right therapist?
Yes. Quick tip. One thing I always say about therapists is no different than you picking out a car. You want the best one for your money. And so you continue to call. There's a lot of therapists that do like quick 30-minute consultations. So you can call, talk to them, get the vibe, get the idea, ask those important questions that we were talking about earlier, right? And then you say, okay, I'm going to give you a call back if this is what I want, and then continue to call. So you can pick about 3 to 5 different ones that you want to interview, and then you can select from there. So don't just assume, do your research and make sure that this person is the right one for you.
Most of us don't think about that very notion of interviewing the doctor. Yeah, and so I think that that's so important and so empowering. So thanks for that reminder. So let's have a little bit of fun for just a moment or two, and then I'm going to impose upon you to perhaps come out of your comfort zone just a little bit. So we've seen how you light up when you talk about your passion, when you talk about this work that you're doing, the drive that you have, and what informs it. So, invariably, somebody is going to make a movie about Dr. Tiffany Anderson. Assuming that you can't play yourself, who would you want to play you in a film about your life and work?
This is good. Okay, so I'm going to go with um, this person only because, I don't think Beyonce will be up for it. So I'm going to go for Marsha Martin. I think I'm saying her first name right, from Blackish, but she's not even a little girl. I think she's like 15, 16 now. I think she's phenomenal. I think she's funny. I think she's quirky. I think she could really kind of tap into who I am as a person. And so I'm going to go with her. And I know she'll do a great job.
What a cool answer. I could see that actually. And I will absolutely, hopefully, we'll be back in the theaters by then. So I'll absolutely plan to go see that one. Um, Before I ask my last question, and it really is a practical one that you alluded to a little bit earlier, it's very interesting to me. Again, the choice of words that were included in your intro, light filled community. How is it that you, as someone who necessarily has to be willing to give so much of your light, in a sense, how do you not take that home and find yourself kind of in a dark place? How do therapists actually revive and renew themselves, because the realities of what they are dealing with sometimes, as you mentioned, can be pretty dark?
Great question. Great question. Um, Going back to what I was speaking about earlier, the work that we do, cannot be faked in any way. It has to be true, right? It has to be a part of your God-given talent. It has to be a part of your passion and your drive. And so, um, the sense of light is something that I've always had my entire life. Again, it has to be authentic to me to do it. And so, the work that I do is not necessarily difficult, right? And when I mean difficult, it is a part of what I'm here to do, right? So it just naturally is something that I'm doing even outside of the therapy room. And I want to be clear about, I have conversations with everyone, right? And so the light part is normal. It's natural. This is where I live in my space at all times. In regards to my clients and their journey, that light is still there, and I hold it there the entire time. Sometimes it may not feel as present for them in the moment, but it's always there, and they know that when they're ready to feel it, I have them, right? And so in the sessions when there is sadness and darkness, what I do for my clients is I just hold it for them. I hold it for them in that moment, and I walk them through. So I always tell them, whatever your pace is, I'm with you. If you want to run, I'm with you. If you want to jog, I'm with you. Just let me know, and we're walking it. We're walking together. When we close out the session, I leave it there, right? I hold it in the moment, but when we close it out, I leave it there. When we resume, I pick it right back up. And so that's a way how I've been able to make sure that I'm not taking it with me. Some other ways, I do a lot of visualization work. And so when I'm done with the day, If I am showering, I am visualizing everything from that day washing off of me and going right down the drain, right? So I'm renewed, I am refreshed. So I have learned how to do a pretty good job with just allowing it to be in that moment. And then another thing, I am also in supervision. So if it's heavy, I take it to supervision just like anyone else, right? That needs support, and say, okay, walk me through this. How do I work through this? And then I'm also in therapy, so that always helps, right? And so I have just certain activities that I do that I make to make sure that I continue to be that light.
That's such a great note to end with, except for the making you a little uncomfortable, I promised. Oftentimes we don't like to plug ourselves, but you mentioned your website earlier in the conversation. So if someone was interested in learning more about your practice or getting in contact with you, what's the best way for them to do so?
Yes. So you can email me at T as in Tiffany, crowntherapy@gmail.com. You can follow me on Instagram at crown.therapy.llc. You can reach out to me that way. My website will be launched next week, so that information will be in the details of the video as well. And then that will be another avenue where you can reach me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Tiffany Anderson. Yep, I slapped the label back on there because you worked hard for that, but we appreciate you just letting us get to know Tiffany a little bit better on this episode of High Tech Sunday. Really enjoyable exchange. Thank you so much. And we're going to hand it back over to Brandon Newby to send us on our way.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of High Tech Sunday. Career Communication Group's High Tech Sunday looks at professional development and technology through the lens of spiritual philosophies. In a time when digital information is more critical than ever, this weekly program is produced by and for CCG's community of alumni and professionals in science, technology, engineering, and math fields. The community runs from national thought leaders to aspiring students, and this weekly series aims to bring a concentrated discussion around technological advancements and achievements based on universal moral principles. The 1-hour podcast will be streamed every Sunday. The podcast can be accessed through the BEYA Facebook page, Women of Color Facebook page, and CCG YouTube page, in addition to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Podbean, and Spotify. Please join us next time.